As a piano teacher, I like to do my own custom lessons for each student. But a lot of teachers follow a course as well, and obviously there's a lot of people looking to self-learn, which is where I can really see the value in a decent method book. After hearing lots of positive things from teachers, other experienced players and beginners who've used it, I decided to take a look at the Alfred Adult All-in-One Piano course. I've spent a good bit of time going through it thoroughly, and hopefully this review will help you decide whether it's right for you, because whilst it's not a huge investment financially, it is time-wise to get through the whole thing, so I think it's worth hearing some pros and cons. I'm going to try and talk about everything that you'll get out of the book, what the music's like, and I'm also going to divide the video up into the good and the mixed aspects of the book. I say mixed because any little negatives I have seem to have a plus side as well. The book has a really focused approach and it seems to achieve what it's going for. It's impossible to include everything anyway. Some things are just not quite the way I would have done it, and other things are just inherent to learning from a book, so there's not really any way around that. That's actually really important though. I'll get to some things later on that you should be aware of if you're self-teaching from a method book, so make sure to stick around for that. I have some links for this book and the next ones in the series down below in the description if you want to check them out. If you're new here, this channel's your guide through developing all the different skills and knowledge you need to become a better piano player and musician. So if that's something you want to do, consider clicking the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss out on anything you need to learn. To start with, as you can see, it's very well put together. Everything is clearly laid out and well presented, which makes learning new information like this much more digestible. It uses a nice large font and large notation, which is really helpful when you're first learning to read, so it's much clearer to see which lines or which gaps the notes are on. The ring binder is also great for keeping the book open on the right page without flapping closed. I would definitely say that the book is really good value for money. It's nearly 160 pages long, so there's a lot of material in it. This is one of the strong points really, because the thing about learning to read music is that to get anywhere with it, you need to be doing a lot of it. But finding suitable material or knowing what's suitable for your level can be challenging. This book gives you a lot to work with to help you practice whilst giving you a gradual but well-paced progression. There's pieces at the back of the book that would probably sound quite challenging or a long way off right now, but following the course it teaches you how to build up to them so you'd be pleased with your progress and what you can do by the time you get there. You'll end up playing quite a lot of well-known tunes you'd recognise in there, which is satisfying. Some nice simplified arrangements of things that are fun to play, like Scarborough Fair, Over the Rainbow, The Entertainer and Greensleeves. Like I said, there's a lot of material. All of it's really useful. Not everything's quite to my taste, but more on that in the mix section. It's very good at building you up slowly, step by step, gradually introducing new concepts and increasing difficulty, allowing you to get familiar with them and actually use them before moving on. It teaches in baby steps, and that's a good thing because this is kind of like learning a new language where you need to learn by doing. Learning fragments and building it up bit by bit until you can hold a conversation. And it explains as much as it can everything you need for the next new thing in the book, so you should never get lost following it. It starts from absolutely nothing as well, naming the notes, basic technique, finger exercises, and covers pretty much all the essentials to get you started if you don't have a teacher. It covers the basics of notation, the grand staff, treble and bass clef, pitches, rhythm, rests, ties, dynamics, and more fundamentals you need to learn as well. And along the way, there's elements of basic theory and technical guidance to help support your playing and understanding. Essentially, it takes you through all the basics of reading and playing you need as a beginner, and introduces you to playing in a few different keys as well, but not too many so it's not overwhelming. Also, just to point out, there is a slightly stripped back version of this book available too, which isn't spiral bound. It's a bit shorter, has less of the theory and technical explanations, but I believe it still has much of the same musical material in a progressive order. This one's called Alfred's Basic Adult Piano Course. It gets you very familiar with certain positions on the piano and on the stave and certain ways of playing chords, for example, and then it keeps using them to reinforce them so you end up developing a confident sense of recognition, then it gradually expands. I've also seen this book recommended a lot by other piano teachers and students who have used it themselves and are pleased with what they got out of it. Just quickly, if you're finding this video helpful so far, please give it a like, and also let me know in the comments how you heard about this book and what your plans are for learning piano. If you're self-learning with a method book, having lessons as well on YouTube or whatever else you're using. Some of these mixed aspects aren't specific to this book, but they're just things beginners should know about anyway. Some aspects of music you could never learn fully from a book by itself, but you can easily still get a lot of use out of the book, and then make sure you're getting what you're missing from lessons or videos online. But there are a few things I think it would do a bit better to explain a bit more of the bigger picture and the how and the why. This is why I recommend this as a fantastic resource for learning to read. but not quite as much for learning about the bigger scope of music. So whilst I said I don't think it always explains everything how I would like, maybe that's an impossible task for one book. And what they were trying to do is to not be too overwhelming when the focus is on reading. So that's probably a good thing in that respect. But what it does do, it gives you things that you can then go off and look for, as beginners often won't know what questions to ask. An inquisitive mindset with music will help you develop your craft. So I think there's 3 main downsides to learning from a book by yourself. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't use it. It just means that you need to bear these things in mind so you can get what you're missing from somewhere else. The first one is listening. So as the book actually does suggest, you should be listening to these pieces, and I also encourage lots of active listening to music anyway, particularly piano music obviously. There's a lot of nuance to playing that you just can't get from a book. It's like copying someone's accent. Even just the basics, without knowing what you're actually aiming for, you might be getting something completely wrong. It might be the notes, it might be how you're playing the rhythm. So perhaps look up some tutorials on rhythms and the basic exercises so you can actually hear what things are meant to sound like. And it's really important with the pieces as well, but there's an easy solution to that. If you search the title of the piece with the word Alfred after it in YouTube, you'll find loads of tutorial videos on each one to help you hear what you're aiming for. And they will help you with the technical side too. Which brings me to my second main drawback. Whilst I think the book does do a fairly good job of describing some basic technique, it is pretty impossible to tackle everything in book format and difficult to get that kind of information across. It's the sort of thing that really does need to be demonstrated. Also, getting feedback on what you're doing is really important. If you're getting lessons or perhaps just the odd lesson, that will help you a lot. But if you can't, you need to be looking at some basic technique tutorials, the videos for the pieces, and some other general piano exercise videos. That'll be really important to help you develop. And the third thing is, I've actually done a whole video on this which talks about the benefits of reading music, what you'll get from it, when it's most useful, but also when other methods are maybe more appropriate and what else you need to be doing on top of reading. I think it's a pretty honest and in-depth discussion on learning to play, which any beginner would find useful to hear. But here I'll just briefly mention that I think it's really beneficial to get some other practical experience learning to play alongside just reading, so that not everything you play comes from the notes on a page. It's important to know that playing music is more than just being good at decoding something from a page. And I really think that other practical experience and ear training will help your reading. Anyway, for more on that, check out that video next. So something I'm sure you all want to know about is, what does the music in the book sound like? Well, it is a bit of a mixed bag in my opinion, but remember, it is beginner music and it does serve a purpose to teach you to get to the good stuff. At the end of the book, there are some pretty nice sounding arrangements you'll be able to play. Some nice ones are Scarborough Fair, Over the Rainbow, Raisins and Almonds, Jericho. There's also a couple which I really don't like. They're useful, but I'll come back to that in a bit. It's all really good material for reading practice and developing your skills, and some beginner stuff is always going to sound a bit plinky plonky along the way to an extent. Sometimes it just has to be done with certain music, but remember, it serves a purpose though, to get the basics down, which then allows you to do more in the future. Think of those pieces as studies or exercises. Remember, they are teaching you how to realize a piece of music from a page. There's a few nursery rhymes in there too, which on the one hand I don't like because it's a bit childish, but then on the other, a familiar melody is actually really useful and it helps you understand what you're doing and give yourself feedback on whether you're playing it right or not. So some of these, if you really like the sound of them, you may want to work on them for a bit longer to get them sounding as nice as you can, and then have them as part of your repertoire. And then others, you may want to get them playable to a reasonable standard, learn from them, and then move on and forget them. All of the material, with a few exceptions, focuses really on a chord-based approach. There's a lot of chords and broken chords in the left hand, which is a good thing, but it also has a couple of downsides. To start with, this approach means it's easier to make a simple song sound more fleshed out like a full song, so that's going to be more satisfying to play. And it's easier to make it sound like proper music. Recognizing chord shapes on the piano and on the page is really useful for all kinds of music, especially more contemporary music. And whilst playing like this is a great way to start learning how to coordinate your hands together, I think it would be nice if there was maybe a little bit more left-hand material like you'd see in classical music, where the lines are more varied and melodic to challenge your reading and independence. It does, of course, still really get you working your hand coordination, and I expect perhaps for a lot of people this is a good way to start. You may also want to find some other beginner pieces outside of the book too, as I think that learning something that you're really inspired to play is very beneficial as well. Whilst it does focus on using chords, I wish it would make more of a deal of learning chords and inversions, getting comfortable with them in all 12 keys all over the keyboard. But again, it is just giving you pieces of what you need for the book, so perhaps it can't tackle everything. I've got some videos up on chords if you want to check some out. There's some links in the description. I think it could maybe do with a few pages focused on a broader overview or summary of reading music as a whole. I think that would make a really good reference to look back on, and as useful as learning step by step is, sometimes you need to have an idea of the bigger picture in mind as well. One thing I find a bit strange is that when the book introduces different scales, it only tells you to practice hands separately or together but in contrary motion. Again, this is really just a preference on the order of doing things, but I see no real reason not to learn them properly, hands together in similar motion. A lot of the pieces in the book I think are harder than playing scales for a beginner, and they're a really useful and important thing to be learning. But you can and should be, in my opinion, learning them elsewhere. I've got a playlist in the description taking you through all the major scales if you want to check that out. And lastly, I can't not mention the supposedly bluesy or rocky pieces in the book. They still have value in practicing reading and technique and talking about some of the chord progression concepts used in that music. They're just awful though. They're not bluesy, they have no groove to them. They're seriously corny. On paper, they have some of the basic elements of that music, but none of the phrasing. If you like them, fair enough, enjoy playing them, but they're just not for me. Anyway, that's only a small part of the book, and I don't really think it holds it back overall. I hope the review was helpful. Please give it a like if it was, and subscribe for more content to help you develop your piano playing. Thanks for watching.